Russia versus Ukraine. What's the end game? What's going to happen? Can the stars tell us more? Let's find out in this video. All right, folks, welcome to another episode where we decode and unravel world events through the lens of astrology, delivered by yours truly, Dr. V. And in this episode, we're going to look at the Russia-Ukraine conflict. By many counts, it's the central conflict of the currently cascading series of wars which together comprise the emerging World War III. When historians in future, when they look back at this time, they are likely to look at this conflict as where it all started. So in this video, we're going to look at not just the charts of the main protagonist, but also of the upcoming transits to get an understanding of what's likely to happen next and what the backgrounds are, the cosmic backgrounds that are at play in the ongoing confrontation. So let's start with looking at the charts of Ukraine and Zelensky. All right, so here we got the chart of Ukraine, and the Ukraine foundation. It took place in the aftermath of the collapse of the Soviet Union, with a series of other states which were all kind of founded around 1991 and 1990. And as you can see, one of the first things that you see right away, you've got the Neptune-Uranus conjunction here, which was active at that time, which is what I call the mystic rebel conjunction, where you have this very airy kind of feeling of uncertainty, unclarity, the dreamy nature, that happens around that conjunction. And it's really here a marker of the state and a nationhood itself when it's so close to the ascendant in the first house. And you've got as well here the sun here with Jupiter and Venus, the greater and the lesser benefic, and they're in the 8th house, right? So they're not on the cusp. So the 8th house is the resources of others in astrology, the resources of others, right? And when you got Jupiter and Venus, those are the benefics, right? That means like great fortune. Then, you're going to have a very good way of getting resources from others, which is what you can see at play very clearly. So Ukraine has been getting billions of dollars in funding over the years now from the West, its Western partners, which already started really with the Mundane revolution, the so-called color revolution in 2014. And since then, Ukraine has been getting propped up regularly by its Western allies through financial support mainly, but also through other types of support. You can see this super strong 8th house here, the resources of others. And again, as I said here, the certain unreality and lack of clarity as to the nature of the state, which is with the Neptune, Uranus on one. You can see that in the fact that Ukraine doesn't really know, or it's not really clear if it's a part of the West or not, if it's part of Europe or not. Is it part of, the Russian sphere of influence or not? Well, they very clearly think they're not. The current leaders think they're not. But the unreality and the lack of clarity, it shows itself very clearly in the fate of the nation. And then you have Pluto here. You can see here Pluto. And Pluto is with Moskva, the asteroid. And Pluto is, of course, where you meet the great darkness, the shadow side, overwhelming power, which opposes you. And that's all here in Moscow. And Damocles is here too. Damocles is the sword, in mythology that hangs over your head and that any time could kind of snap and fall down and be your end. And that's very clearly Moscow. And that's all written in the chart, as you can see very clearly here. So let's go on now and have a look at the chart of Zelensky, Vladimir Zelensky. So for Zelensky, I've also brought up here the chart which has the asteroids in it as well, because the asteroids are really so telling if you're able to read them, you get another whole level of detail and depth, which most astrologers simply lack. They don't have that. They don't work with it. They don't know how to work with it. They don't know how to read it. And they kind of miss an entire layer of the story. Now, when we look at Zelensky's chart here, you can see, well, he's got a sun with Venus here, right, in Aquarius. So Sun and Venus, you see this often with artists, right? So the personality, the consciousness that is about the creation of beauty, the expression of beauty, the entertainment, pleasure, all of these kind of things, right? And it's in Aquarius, so it's going to be very, unconventional kind of expressions of pleasure, entertainment, and beauty. He was an actor, basically. In some ways, you could say he probably still is an actor. He was a famous actor before in Ukraine, and he had all kinds of roles, very unconventional roles. He's played some things that you could say are not very becoming of a president. He was an actor for certain types of LGBTQ performances and certain types of dance performances, and really kind of like a showgirl, basically like a male showgirl. You can search and find the videos if you are inclined to see this. Not really a pleasurable sight to behold, but if you want to see what this guy was doing before, you can. And he has also in his chart, you see here Jupiter with Ukraine, the asteroid Ukraine. It's perfectly conjunct. So this is also written in his chart that he's going to have huge opportunities with regards to Ukraine, in Ukraine. And then, not a big surprise, Moscow, the asteroid Moscow is on his Saturn. What's Saturn? Saturn is the place where you experience rejection, right? The place where you experience hardship, challenges, opposition, rejection, difficult karma. That's where your Saturn is, right? His Saturn is exactly conjunct Moscow. So another way to tell you that he's going to be somebody who spends a large part of his life, or the main kind of part, the defining part of his life, struggling against adversity, which comes from Russia and Moscow in this case, right? But there's one more thing which I want to draw your attention to, and this is really interesting. It can give us some pointers towards what is going to be the ultimate development in this story. And that's where his Chiron is placed. So if you look at his Chiron here, Chiron, it's basically stands for the point of the wound. It stands for, where you have a certain type of rejection that you experience, a vulnerability that you experience, where you're wounded, where you're seen as an outcast of sorts. And this Chiron, it's here in a tension to his Sun Mars opposition. So even though he's got the Sun Venus, as I said before, right, with the unconventional artist and actor, he's also got an opposition to Mars. The Sun is in opposition to Mars, so he's a fighter too. He's a warrior too at the same time, right? So he's actually well made for playing the role of the Rambo with the wearing the military shirt, T-shirt, and being this kind of soldier character. That's written in his chart too, right? He's got the Sun opposite Mars, which is this kind of bellicose character who thrives with opposition and is like a tough, gets tough with opposition. He's got that too in his chart, right? But then, he's got this Chiron here. The Chiron is the vulnerability, right? The point of vulnerability. And that's with these asteroids that are very telling. And they are Bellerophon, which stands for war. There are America and Mason Coal, right? Mason Coal stands for Freemasons. And America is self-explanatory, stands for America, right? So what you can see here in the chart, what I'm telling you to pay attention to, is that this guy's Zelensky, his vulnerability, his point of the wound, where he's weak, where he's vulnerable, is with relation to Freemasons, that's like secret societies that make decisions behind the scenes, and America and war, right? Those are the three things that you can see there. So this is how to interpret this. Even though right now it very much looks like he's been really successful with, especially with his tours of, asking for money. He came to America a few times and he got the standing ovations and everything. And, with his son in the ninth house, he's going to have a lot of, friends and a lot of love abroad. The ninth house is also abroad, the big world out there, the foreign countries, outside countries, right? But even though that's the case, ultimately, what's written in his chart is that the secret groups that make decisions behind closed doors, and especially important American groups that make such decisions, they're going to be his vulnerability. They're going to let him down. They're going to let him fall, right? So, and you can see the shift towards this actually already happening where, his public persona in America and in American discourse has suffered a lot right now. So, if when it started out as being hailed as a hero, right now he's more seen as a glorified beggar of sorts. And this clip here I'm going to play for you, this is really emblematic of how Zelensky's seen now.
If you can't give us some financial support, okay, please give us a credit and we will give you back money after the war.
That's all, folks.
All right, so that's increasingly the image that Zelensky has amongst the American public, especially, which is so important for him with regards to being able to continue receiving the kind of massive donations that he has been receiving. Now, obviously, that's bad for him personally. There's also a lot of stories now about vast kind of embezzlement that has happened with hundreds of millions of dollars that have disappeared, or with weapons that they received and that were then sold elsewhere on the black market everywhere in the world. But obviously also with regards to the outcome of the war, which depends directly on America's further support. But let's look at the actual transits that Ukraine and Zelensky are expecting for the coming time, so that we can have a better idea of where this war is going. So I got Zelensky's chart right here, and one thing that stands out is that there is a Pluto transit which is in opposition to his Mars, right? So this is a long transit. Pluto is really slow, right? When Pluto hits any point in your chart, that's not a short thing, that's like a long-term thing. So I'm going to go back to see when this happened and, when this really came into being. And we're going to see this has been basically the case the whole time. The war started in 22 and, shortly after, Pluto has been in direct opposition to his Mars. You can see here, it was here perfect, in the beginning of 23, see here, the opposition, right? And then, this just continues there. Like, basically, this guy, he is fighting a massive war exactly at the time in his life when he is experiencing a Pluto transit in opposition to his Mars, right? So you can already tell here that he might have had there might have been a lot of, spin doctors and advisors and political advisors and whatnot in the background that decided that he should become the president and he should play this role and he should, have this kind of responsibility. But you can tell that there was no astrologer there looking at the charts before, because they would have told him that, they would have told whoever calls the shots that, this guy is not the right guy to run this war like now. Like a Pluto opposite Mars transit, the archetypal symbolism of that is Pluto is overwhelming force, is like vast, deep, dark collective force, which is much larger than yourself. And Mars is individual force, right? Is your own drive, your own individual force. So Pluto transit opposite your Mars means that during that phase of life, you're going to have defeats. You're going to experience defeats, and you're going to be facing an overwhelmingly large counter force, right? And that is karmically, or in your fate, in your destiny, in your life, it's a phase when you need to learn to accept and embrace defeat. Now, on a personal level, that can be something that's necessary, so that you can grow as a person. But you don't necessarily want a president who has that transit happening in those 3 years, running the war for your country in those 3 years. Unless if the country is actually karmically destined to lose this battle. So let's look if that's actually the case. Now, before I go there though, I'm still going to give you the outlook on this transit, right? Because right now, as we know, Pluto is in Aquarius. It's kind of left the opposition a little bit. It's just in a wide, far opposition. It's kind of leaving. So you could think, okay, is everything done now? Is it over? Is this experience of karmic defeat, and humiliation, is this over? No, unfortunately not, for everyone involved, because Pluto is coming back. Pluto is coming back into Capricorn, and when it's coming back here towards the end of the year, September, right? So in September, starting first week of September, Pluto is coming back, and then Pluto is staying there in exact opposition to Vladimir Zelensky's Mars, you see, in exact opposition. It's staying there for a good time, and then kind of leaving towards the end of the year, right? So karmically, this means that in that time period, September to December 2024, this experience has to come to a conclusion, right? When you have Pluto like a slow mover, a slow planet, it sometimes hits your natal planet 3 or even 4 times, right? Because of retrograde motion. And when that happens, the first transit, the first hit is always when the problematic, the issue, it becomes manifest. The second transit is when you have to go through the depths of it, the height of the crisis. The third hit is when it's going to come to a solution, to a conclusion, right? So this has to come to a conclusion around September to December 24 for Zelensky personally. Let's keep that point for our analysis and go on to the next chart. All right, the next piece of evidence that I'm submitting to the jury is the Aries ingress of the sun for Ukraine. And I'm just going to briefly look at this. The Aries ingress, it shows you in Mundane what a particular region or state is going to experience. And you've got Mars exactly on the ascendant here, you see. So Ukraine is fighting for its life in this period, which started March 2024 and then goes to the next ingress in 25, right? In spring 25. And you've got also here the sun with Neptune, which could mean dissolution, right? Dissolution of the self in one, right? In one. So this is like, it could be read differently too, right? There's different ways to read this. There's different ways to trigger this. But this is one more piece of evidence. In astrology, we always want multiple pieces of evidence before we have a conclusion. And the next one is to look at the chart of Ukraine itself and at the transits that we're going to see here for Ukraine. So let me bring this up here. Okay. So here for Ukraine, you've got here, okay, in the coming time, starting from September 24, you've got a transit of Uranus on the IC. You see, transiting Uranus exactly on the IC. What does this mean? Uranus on your IC, it means that the inner identity of the state, in the case of a natal chart, for a state, it's basically the territory, the population and the territory, right? The grounds of the place, right? The constitution, the territory, that's the fourth house, right? The IC is going to go through a revolution, a sudden change, a complete disruption. That's Uranus, right? Uranus coming there. Uranus visiting and saying like, okay, it's time to shake things up and completely disrupt things with regards to your territory, right? So, okay, this could be read as basically a sudden shift or change of the territory, losing a lot of territory. Losing a lot of territory is a potential interpretation of this, right? Uranus from September is on the IC of Ukraine. So that's another thing that points towards September. Lastly, let's look at the adversary. Let's look at Russia. I'm not going to do much about the Russian chart, actually, about the Putin's chart, because there's so much to say, and we're going to do so many other videos about Russia and about Putin. Putin is obviously like a major figure in the world events of our times that we're living in. So that deserves its own video. I'm not going to look too much at the details of it. Just this much, that in the Russian chart, you have, as predictable, America here, the asteroid with Saturn, so experiencing rejection from America, being really the opponent, the adversary of America, primarily, right? Ukraine is not even the main adversary, it's America for Russia, right? And you can see this here, Saturn with the asteroid America in the 7th house. The 7th house is the house of partners and open enemies, right? When you have Saturn there, then it's likely to be an enemy, right? And America is with Saturn. But importantly, the asteroid Ukraine, it's here in the 9th house. It's in Pisces. It's on 16 Pisces. And this is an important degree. Remember this? I'm going to come back to this, right? It's in opposition to their Jupiter in the 3rd house. The 3rd house is near neighbors, right? Jupiter in the 3rd house means expansionism with regards to near neighbors, close neighbors, right? And this is in opposition to Ukraine, exact opposition to Ukraine, right? Expansionism with regards to Ukraine, right? Ukraine is the target of the expansionism. But now, let's look at the transits and remember this degree that I just mentioned, where Ukraine is on, the asteroid Ukraine. So going on to the Russian chart and looking at the transits that Russia is experiencing, right? First thing you see right away is that Saturn, and we just had recently a Mars-Saturn conjunction, right? Like the malefics, they just came together, and they were where? They were exactly on the degree where the asteroid Ukraine is in Russia's chart. And lo and behold, this activation, it exactly coincides with Russia now taking a much harder stance against Ukraine, right? Until recently, they were always saying this is a special military operation. They weren't hitting vital infrastructures. They were not treating it like a war. They were treating it like a military operation, like a special operation, right? And this has changed now. So you had the terrorist attack that happened in Moscow, where the Russians said that Ukraine was involved. Whether that's true or no, nobody can tell, right? And probably there's lots of things involved there that we don't know, because this is another marker of Pisces, is like hidden and secret things happening in the backgrounds. But be that as it may, since that time, since this conjunction that we had then shortly after, with Mars Saturn in Pisces, Russia has started to just completely devastate Ukraine, right? Now they're bombing everything. They're starting to bomb energy facilities, and they're carpet bombing on the front lines, and they're just kind of devastating them completely, right? And they weren't doing that before. They started doing that now. And so how does this develop further? Right, so what happens next is that Saturn leaves a little bit and then comes back. It's basically there for the rest of the year. And in August, starting August, but especially in September, again, it's there exactly. It's exactly on that degree, 16 Pisces. You see, then Saturn still goes a little bit and comes back again to hit for a last time in January. You see here, January 25. So between September and January 25, Saturn is hitting this position where the asteroid Ukraine is 2 or 3 times, right? And that's the last piece of evidence that we really need to put these things together. So what we said is that Zelensky he's going to have a conclusion to his karmic experience of defeat that he's going through right now, this massive, large-scale karmic experience of defeat. That's going to come to a conclusion from September to December, January 24, right? At the same time, we saw September 24, Ukraine has, as a nation state, as an entity, is going to undergo some disruptions and some ruptures to its own territorial integrity with the Uranus on the IC. And lastly, I just showed you that Russia has been gloves off and is going to go for full destruction, right? Is going to go for full destruction. As sad as this sounds and as unfortunate this is, that, unfortunately, more souls will have to come and face their maker unnecessarily, right? Or necessarily, I'm not here to judge this in this video, if this could have been prevented, if, who's actually fueling this and who's behind the scenes here making this happen. We're going to talk about this in other videos in future when we're going to decode and unlock the metaphysical backgrounds of these great wars that are going on right now. But right now, for our current analysis, suffice it to say that it doesn't look good for Ukraine, especially towards the end of the year, September to December. The winter is going to be very, very hard, and the prediction is that it's going to be the end of Ukraine as a nation state. Now, what does this mean for the next steps in the escalation of World War III? What does it mean for Russian ambitions towards Europe? What does it mean for American attempts to control that region? Those are all questions that need to be looked at separately. We're going to do that in future videos. If you haven't done so yet, make sure to subscribe to this channel so you're going to be in the loop and in the know with everything that there is to know about the unfolding craziness and madness that we're all a part of right now. Knowing what the stars tell us, it just allows you to mitigate your risk. It allows you to set yourself up in a better way for your future, for your family, especially, right? Making the right choices for yourself. That's why I'm looking forward to be on this journey with you together. This is Dr. V. Take care of yourself. Be blessed.